bring it back, but it's more than basic. It's a portion of his rap, but the core is ancient. It's important like a pack of some more observations. They're important like the fact that we're bored of fake shit. More creative, have the floor, so take it. Travel to the door is a normal placement. Tattoos on my arm ain't a form of face yet.
Guys, I've really enjoyed doing this podcast, and I hope that you've enjoyed hearing our voices. At the beginning, when we started doing it, we kind of introduced ourselves, but we didn't really introduce a whole lot about ourselves, and so I wanted to try to fill in a few gaps, at least on me and Ben, because, you know, I've mentioned Black Spot Tattoo Company, and I've mentioned things like Hidden Village, I've mentioned things like Naruto. I've kind of told how we met, but I haven't really told you how we got to here in this space. And I think that's a story that needs to be told at least one time in the early days of this podcast. So we're going to address some of that today on Tattoo with Children, which is what you're listening to. I am your host, Flavor Ray in Seat A. Across from me in Seat B is the Dread Pirate Benjamin. And across from us both is our favorite New Jersey native, CIO No Pain. Guys, how are you today on this crisp fall afternoon?
It's a lovely day. I love it.
I feel like I got run over by a truck.
See, this is what happens. Okay, so last week, the weather or 2 weeks ago, the weather kind of shifted, and my lungs went into, fuck you mode, and I was just basically a walking pile of fluid. And today, it's Ben's turn. My lungs are still fucked, so I didn't feel it as bad, but Ben is shit.
Yeah, I mean, it could be that. It could just be my typical like mental state. Like we come into the fall, and like the 2% of me that's Romani, just is like fuck everything and get out.
Well, I mean because the wind starts blowing, and we're trying to go from hot to cold.
Right.
And Texas fights hot to cold really hard.
Yeah.
And so the autumn is all, like my wife told me that last night. She said, I fucking hate the fall.
Right.
Because I spend my whole day in 70-degree weather.
Right.
And then somewhere in the middle of 9 o'clock at night, it's 40 goddamn degrees, and I want to kill myself.
Right. Well, and you walk in and out of pockets.
Yeah.
So you're like perfectly fine. You got your adult long pants on, and you got your little blue jean jacket or your little wrap or your little your hoodie.
Right.
And you're fine.
Right.
And then you got to run an errand. And you get out the car and you walk straight into a 98-degree pocket of air.
Right.
You start rolling up things, taking things off, like stripping on your way into a store. And then you get to the next errand, point B on the list, and what happens?
It's now 40 degrees again.
It's now you need a wrap, you need a hat. My ears hurt. Like, the wind's blowing. Like, everything shrivels up and moves inside my body.
Right.
Like, and it's just not good.
Yeah, it happens to me a lot because I go into a building at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and I come out at 11 o'clock at night. So I go in literally in one season and come out in another season. I can never be dressed appropriately, ever.
Hey, this brings up, when are we starting our Patreon page?
That's a good question.
Because I'm doing some killer artwork over here while we're talking and Mike's doing technical stuff. Really, you're talking.
Yeah.
And I'm doing some killer artwork, and I think the people need to be able to get to that artwork.
Well, yeah, but we don't want to give it to them for free because that's not what prostitutes do.
That's not what we do.
So here's the idea, guys. We're gonna start a Patreon page, and the purpose of the Patreon page is to help us expand the podcast. Essentially, we're gonna buy new equipment and we're gonna build out a recording space so you do not have to hear all the background noise. You don't have to hear the dogs anymore, shit like that.
Well, and also, so we have some room for people to come join us, and
Yeah.
for to have an audience. Just because people don't want to be on the podcast, they could still be in the room.
Right. And we want to get some video up so you guys can get that live experience, just every time for the entire podcast. We need a little bit extra scratch to do that. So we're going to start a Patreon page. Part of the stretch goals will be access to... I do these rants which are too violent and foul in language, with very sensitive material to really post on the podcast for everybody to just get. But if you're a Patreon, I'm assuming that you're ready for some sort of nonsense like that, and so you'd get access to my rants, and you'd get access to Ben's artwork. If you give enough money on the stretch goal, you can get some of Ben's artwork sent to you. And we have a lot of products, and so the more money you give, the more things that we can give you. And so that's the general idea. We can get Mike to sing Disney songs.
Yeah,
we can
if
get
you're a
access to
fan
that.
of terrible karaoke, then I suggest buying that.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So, yeah,
I think also like a personal visit from the Dread Pirate Benjamin. Like I show up at your house with roses and like balloons for your birthday or some shit.
Yeah, maybe we don't do that. I just immediately pictured Ben knocking on the door and this broad opening the door with a negligee on, go, "Oh, hey, you're here," and Ben standing there with flowers, going, "Oh shit, maybe I made a mistake here."
I bucked up.
But the whole idea, guys, is we actually do have more content that we can get to you guys. We just need a bigger space created here to get that to you. So we're going to actually try and make that happen sometime soon. We haven't heard from Mike yet. Mike, your day today? What's going on, buddy?
Getting reorganized, getting back on task. I feel like today is going to be a slightly less creative day than perhaps yesterday was. Did a lot of creativity yesterday, and now I've got to take that and organize it. So the afternoon is going to be pretty interesting.
That's good. That's good that we're all doing appropriate work. Speaking of work, I was going to talk about how we ended up doing this particular work. Well, not doing this work, doing this space, the space that we're in. So the space that we're in is at Black Spot Tattoo Company, which is the address is. Go ahead, man. Tell them what the address is. They want to hear from you.
302 Mantooth.
302 Mantooth. Remember that address. That's in Lufkin, Texas. 302 Mantooth. This is actually, and I believe this is still true, this is the only machine-free tattoo shop in North America, perhaps in the world, but for sure in North America. Ben actually did talk to and get tattooed by a machine-free tattoo artist years ago, and that guy's entire ambition was to create a machine-free tattoo shop.
Right.
And he was unbelievably angry that we had already done it.
Yeah, he wasn't happy that I had a total of 34 days of experience and that I was just gonna. I think what he didn't realize is I was from Texas,
right?
Mm-hmm. And he's from somewhere in Europe.
Right.
He's not from Iceland, but he lives in Iceland now, and it upset him very much. He actually quit tattooing me and went to take a smoke break. I mean, we were friends.
Can you imagine that? You're sitting in the chair getting a tattoo, and you say something, and all of a sudden the artist just puts his shit down and walks the fuck out.
He's like,
Yeah.
"What? What did you just say?"
And so I'm asking his Icelandic companion. I said, "Is he okay?" And she's like, "Yeah, he's a little hot right now. I probably wouldn't go out there." And I was like, "Well, I want a cigarette too." And she's like, "No, that's not a good idea."
So, God, okay. I told you I'm still having some lung issues. So, how do we get there? How does a person open up a machine-free tattoo shop when all other tattoo shops use machines? Well, it starts at a coffee shop.
Yeah, we were, so in 2000, this goes back to us meeting. In 2000,
Yeah, it does.
in 2010, I was, due to the economic downturn of 2008, in 2010, I was working at Starbucks. They called it part-time, which I never understood because I worked 40 hours a week.
Right.
But they called it part-time, and I was painting houses on the side.
Mm-hmm.
And I was outside ranting one morning, and a guy walked up that I didn't know and said, "Hey, my boss wants to start a coffee shop downtown." And I was like, I was in a bad mood, so I was just like, "I'm Ben, you're whoever, and fuck off."
Right.
And I went back to my rant, and my rant was just typical, rebellion against.
If I had this coffee shop right now, here's what I would do.
Yeah, and so I never expected that guy to actually, bring anything to the table. But sure enough, the next day we had like tornado watches and like 2 sightings. The sky was green for like 7 hours. My manager and my assistant manager didn't show up that day.
Okay.
Because of the weather. So I had been running the shop since 5 a.m. Starbucks is a very, very busy place, so it was a little stressful.
Even in a thunderstorm, people need their goddamn coffee.
Right. So it was a rough day, and these 3 suits walked up on me in the parking lot smoking a Black and Mild. That was back in my pipe tobacco days, and they were like, "Hey, we're these guys, and we want to start this coffee shop." And I was like, "Yeah, go ahead and go in and get a table, and I'll be in a minute when I finish this." Which is not a very respectful thing to say. But
Yeah, no. I mean, just picture like Ben is like, how old you were there? Like 30?
yeah,
He's 30. He's 30 years old. He's covered in fucking chocolate. He's smoking a cigarette. He's pissed off because he's been working the shop by himself. And these guys come out there and like, "Hey, man," he's like, "Not shaking your fucking hand. Get in there and get a table. I'll talk to you."
Not just guys in suits. These are
Yeah,
not,
yeah.
and they're not cheap suits. At least on one of the guys.
No,
it's
yeah,
not
no.
cheap suits.
I'm certain it must have been like, did I forget to introduce myself as a rich guy?
right, yeah. No, it's actually not one of my prouder moments. Every time I look back on that moment, I cringe just a little bit. I'm just like, oh, God, I was kind of a dick.
Right.
So fast forward to 2011, we start the coffee shop, and I only own a little bit of it. A couple years later, because of Flavor Ray and another friend of mine, I'm able to purchase it from the guy I started it with, and that was kind of a dream come true for me, even though everyone had seen that as a very negative thing.
Yeah, it was not well received among the people that we were, our loved ones, our family. Like
Yeah,
everybody
well,
thought that was a bad idea.
It wasn't profitable.
No, it wasn't.
So we were actually buying something that wasn't profitable yet.
And we were stunned. I remember exactly how unprofitable it actually was.
I think it took us about like 3 months to figure it out.
It was real bad, guys. It was rough. We walked in on the clusterfuck, and it was one of those things where you sort of like, oh yeah, this is how it's gonna go, and then you get in there like, okay, we've already spent all the money. It's been week 1. How do we do that?
Yeah. It took us another 9 months to figure out cash flow, and to figure out how to have enough to keep operating. But anyway.
And then 3 months later, we figured out inventory.
Yeah, so I was going through some pretty personally rough. I had been adjusting. I knew how much it was going to take to change over, but I was still a little blindsided by how much it affected me. That much change in that short a period of time, and so it affected my relationship with my family, my kids,
Right.
my wife. It had a huge impact on my personal life. I started drinking a lot.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't know that about me because I come from a background where no alcohol or cigarettes is involved.
Right.
So a lot of people didn't know that I really started I really started drinking a lot.
And I was I am a recovering alcoholic, I guess you could say. I don't really use that term anymore, but back then I was definitely a recovering alcoholic.
Sure.
And so I wasn't drinking at all, but I could definitely see the signs
Right.
of that sort of chemical dependent depression. It's not really
Yeah.
it's not you're depressed directly.
Right.
You're sort of making yourself depressed to sort of match your physicality with your internal feelings.
Yeah, I was hitting I was hitting the rum or the tequila or the beer or whatever I could as early as noon every day. I was hiding, I think, how much I was drinking from everyone. And it didn't help.
No, it doesn't
You
help.
mentioned, I actually think that's a very accurate description. I was struggling So I was relying on a chemical to keep me going. And because I was relying on a chemical to keep me going, that chemical was having other effects on me. And that's not to say that alcohol is bad. It's just simply that I was using it incorrectly.
Yes, that is an incorrect use of alcohol, which is, by the way, one of God's greatest liquids.
Absolutely.
Even as an alcoholic, I haven't touched the stuff in well over 10 years. I still respect it and have a great affection for it. It didn't ruin my life.
Yeah.
I was bad for alcohol more than alcohol was bad for me.
Yeah.
And I take responsibility for that.
Yeah, and so, during that time, it was pretty obvious, I think, to a lot of people that I was spiraling. And in that time, I remember, this is a funny thing, being where I came from, but I went to my dad and I said, Pops, this isn't, and we did not have a good relationship really at that point.
Uh-huh.
And I said, Pops, what should I do, man? This shit isn't working, And I meant the coffee shop, and
right.
I didn't know if I should quit it and take a straight job.
Well, just real fast, on my end, my wife at this, I had put more into this at this point than I ever put into anything in my entire life. I had pretty much taken anything that I had earned in the last, 10 years or so, plus some, and sunk it into the coffee shop. Because A, I'd always wanted to have a cool coffee shop in Lufkin, and B, I really saw something unique in Ben that I just knew was going to come up aces if I just stuck with it long enough. And my wife was very much in the camp of, why are you doing this?
Yeah.
Every day it was, you're going down there every day, and this guy is obviously spiraling.
Right.
There's not much work being done. You're not making any money.
Right.
Why don't you just cut your losses? Why don't you, and every time I thought about it, the thought I kept having is, what if I gave up on myself at that same time? Because it was really like watching me from the outside.
Yeah.
And if I can't give up on me, I can't give up on him. If I can't give up on him, I can't give up on us, which means I can't give up on this coffee shop. I cannot abandon everything I believe in just because it's hard. And so I stuck with it probably longer than anybody reasonable would have considered reasonable.
Yeah, there was a lot of stubbornness involved in those days.
Yeah, it really was.
Not all of it was good.
Yeah, honestly, it really wasn't. If we had you over again, we probably would have approached those months differently.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, not that it was a regret. I don't regret anything about anything, ever in my life, because I like where I am.
Sure.
But it's definitely one of those things where if somebody came to me with advice right now in that same situation, I wouldn't be like, no, keep talking on the bench. You'll get there eventually.
Right.
Right. I would have a different piece of advice for that person.
Right. So that time period kind of ended with that conversation with my dad, where I went to him and said, "Hey, Pops, what should I do?" And his response, because he's done a lot of what I would call soul work, or the deeper things that run in between and through our lives and connectedness. And
your dad sort of started at the metaphysical and worked back towards the real physical world.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. And so when I asked him, Dad, what should I do? His response was, the way I recall it, was, well, what do you want to do forever?
Right.
And I said, and I knew immediately, as soon as he said the question, I didn't know beforehand, but as soon as he said, what do you want to do forever? I said, well, I want to get tattoos forever, and I kind of want a tattoo. And he said, well, then how do you approach that? So when we come back from a break, we will jump into how I approached getting tattoos forever.
It's going to be very different than what you're thinking.
My name ain't Mikey, but yeah, I rock. You know why? Because I don't give a fuck. That's why it doesn't matter whether I'm...
So while this is going on, there's all sorts of side work going on, because Here's the thing about Ben. Ben can never really stop working. And so while it seems like he's not working, he actually still is working. Like even right now, he's still drawing content for a Patreon that we haven't put up yet. So while he's, he's not in a good place, he's working on getting out of that place. And one of the things he's doing to work on getting out of that place is he's in the coffee shop. He's sitting on a stool at the bar, and he's drawing on these napkins with a Sharpie.
Yeah, and then I'm either taking them to the back alley and setting them on fire, or pouring coffee on them so no one can take them away.
And he's doing this incessantly, okay? All this just becomes napkin art. And so people the first person I think that really noticed that this napkin art was different than art they'd seen before was my wife.
Yeah.
She started grabbing them. After she was finished, like grab them and just put them behind the bar.
Right.
And so so eventually you just get this stack of napkin arts.
Yeah, which is incredibly frustrating when you run out of napkins on like a Tuesday morning, and then
Right.
you go to grab that stack and realize that I put fuck on it like 47 times, and you can't actually give that to a damn client.
Right. Like none of this here is stuff that we can actually use, and we need supplies. But yeah, we have and this napkin art looks a lot like a weird throwback sort of tattoo. Like we all noticed it. You know, like everyone knows this napkin art kind of felt ancient, even though he was just doing it to keep his mind off of, whatever he's trying to keep his mind off of.
Well, this goes back to our ties to. I've already written down on this piece of art I'm doing, Indochina. This goes back to our ties to ancient Japan, ancient culture, ancient China, whatever we're tied to on that continent. Images of curtains, images of
waves,
of clouds, of mountain ranges. Very almost, it's an insult to say they were good enough to be cave drawings because they didn't come from that vein.
Yeah,
They came from more of the idea of a hanging scroll, the artwork that you would see at the top or the bottom of the scroll.
right. Yeah, and so people started to call Ben an artist, which really frustrated Ben because Ben never considered himself an artist, and he didn't consider his drawings worth anything.
Correct.
But people really gravitated to them. And so when he gets this idea from talking to his dad that he wants to get tattoos and he wants to be a tattoo artist, we begin talking to people who also were interested in tattoos about the kind of tattoos, how tattoos were in the area, who to get a tattoo from, so on and so forth. And we came to some startling conclusions. The first conclusion we came to was you had to drive at least 2 hours to get a decent tattoo if you didn't go to this one particular shop in Nacogdoches, which was Casey's Tattoo in Nacogdoches.
Yeah, which is where we all went. I still remember one of the hurricanes where me and my brothers had a day off, and the hurricane, and the only reason we had a day off is because the amount of traffic coming out of Houston. This might be back 2006, 2007, somewhere in there.
Okay.
And so Casey's Tattoo didn't even exist yet. It was a place called Tattoo Magic.
Tattoo Magic, yeah.
And we actually had to drive up 69 over to 7, take the back roads to get to 59, and come back down to Tattoo Magic.
Come back down, and that's all the way down.
And then it was 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Sitting literally 2 lanes of traffic across from the shop to get a break in the traffic leaving Houston to get over to Tattoo Magic so we could get tattooed.
Right.
Now, we had called ahead and said, hey, are y'all open? They said, yeah. But they didn't realize that no one else was going to be able to get to them either. So as we get there, they're locking the door.
Right.
We're like, hey, we just called.
Right.
And they're like, yeah, man, but no one's fucking doing this. So we sat outside, smoked cigarettes, and then they were like, you know what, come on in, let's do it. And that was Pat Casey's crew. At the time, I think it was Aaron and Melissa. At the time, Caleb may or may not have been there. I'm not sure. Ruby was doing piercings.
Yeah.
There was and that crew had a big impact on Pat opening Casey's Tattoo,
Right.
which became the premier shop to go to, I would argue, within 200 miles of Lufkin in any direction.
I mean, the great thing about Casey's tattoo is the first part was Pat Casey, who was just a phenomenal tattoo artist. But he had the knack of surrounding himself with other phenomenal tattoo artists. And so while the tattoo artists there would swap out, there would always be a consistent level of art. And that was just not the case with any other shop in Lufkin or Nacogdoches. Casey's was the only shop that managed to accomplish that.
Yeah, and I think Gypsy Blue, I mean, Bubba,
Gypsy Blue,
Bubba and Carol did a thing.
Yeah, they were the old guard, like the oldest tattoo art shop in the area was Gypsy Blue, and they held on for a good long while there, but even they like it was the thing where yes, the art could be considered good, but it was so far old, like Cherry Creek shit. And
It was the 1980s, early 90s style of tattooing. I mean, they came up well before then. Carol was probably one of the first female artists tattooing in Angelina County, but that goes back to probably the 70s.
Yeah, and they weren't going to change.
Yeah, and nor should they.
Right.
They have deep ties to the Big Top. They have deep ties to actual Romani. They have deep ties to a lot of the famous tattoo artists that you know and have heard of and read online. And so I don't think they should have. They just had, like all of us in the 90s, they had a little bit of a branding issue. But again, don't think they weren't stacking cash and tattooing a shit ton of people and doing really good, clean work. We've had the fortune of tattooing or touching up some of Carol's work from 30 years ago. And I got to say, I don't think there's anyone who was putting in as clean lines that held, whose designs were done in such a way that 30 years later, someone said, I don't want this touched up, I just want you to make it new again.
Right.
And so that to me is the highest flattery. If people say that about my work one day, I'll be very happy. I'm trying to live up, even though my style is different. I'm trying to live up to her. But anyway, back to your story.
So the whole deal was we're talking to a lot of people, and we're doing this. I got to understand how much time we spent talking to people back in those days. We're spending probably 20 hours a day and talking to people and 4 hours sleeping. And so, we're staying up to 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning talking about tattoos. And it suddenly occurred to us, because we'd bought a coffee shop, it occurred to us that, us being adults, we could actually open up a tattoo shop.
Right.
And it was like, we said, well, you got to find an apprentice. That was the whole thing. It said, well, you got to find an apprenticeship. You got to go to an established tattoo shop and get an apprenticeship. And so you began talking to established tattoo shops. Am I correct?
Yeah.
You talked to a tattoo artist about, how do I become an apprentice?
Yeah, so I talked to a lot of people back then. First and foremost was Pat Casey.
Right.
And I went to Pat and I said, hey, man, I want to, how would I go about getting an apprenticeship, And he was like, well, I mean, this is how you do it, but you can't do it.
Right.
And I was like, well, why not? And he was like, well, you're not coming at it from the way that an apprentice comes at it. And I'm like, well, how's that? So he described, you draw, you fill these books, you have your portfolio, if you will. You have your art that you can take someone. And so we talked off and on, back and forth, and then finally I kind of, I feel like in one conversation over a beer or a cigarette, I was like, hey, man, I really want to apprentice here. And he was like, yeah, that's not going to happen.
Yeah. I remember at some point he simply said no.
Yeah, and he was totally right, and his reasoning for being totally right was that he knew that I start businesses and that I run with people who start businesses, and that I was going to come back and start a tattoo shop.
Right.
So why would he
Train his competition.
Yeah, why would he train his competition? So then I spent a little bit of time arguing with him about that and trying, like in a friendly way,
Right.
and trying to get him to go half with me on it. Mm-hmm. Like, let's open up a Casey's Tattoo in Lufkin.
Yeah.
His concern, as I recall it, was number one, he'd be in direct competition with Gypsy Blue,
Right.
which he didn't want to do. He has a lot of respect for Bubba and Carol. He didn't want to muddy what he felt was already kind of a precarious customer base.
Right.
And so it wasn't a good fit. You know, we couldn't really go into business together.
And it was very obvious, at least to me, that he was right about most of it. You know, that was like,
Yeah.
I think he's correct in that, you know, trying to redo Casey's Tattoo isn't going to work in Lufkin.
Right. Yeah, I think it would have created some problems. I would agree with you. Pat's an on-point business guy.
Yeah. He was definitely on point about that part at least.
Yeah, and his shop is, again, I argue, one of the most underrated shops in Texas.
Perhaps the most underrated shop in Texas. I mean, the fact that none of those guys have been on, you know, a tattoo master's program
Right, or
is a goddamn travesty.
Or on the cover of Inked Magazine or Ink Texas or whatever it is, Texas Ink or
Yeah.
any of these things. So, yeah, sorry, I keep getting closer and further away, but I think the thing but what he did do is he pointed me in the direction of the correct equipment to buy.
Right.
He pointed me in the direction of what to research.
Right.
Like, he wasn't teaching me how to fish per se, right? But he was making sure that I knew which shops to stop at along the way to the river.
Right. And so taking that guidance, we started taking actions. And the truth is, a lot of those early actions led to some really rough results. We'll talk about that in just a second. And so, to continue the story, we it's like, okay, what equipment do you buy? What did you do? And like, we had decided at that point, okay, you're not going to be an apprentice. We're going to have to start trying to do it. And so we started trying to do the thing that you would normally do, is buy the tool that you need. And so we wanted to buy a tattoo machine. Mm-hmm. Now, you don't want to get the wrong tattoo machine.
Right.
Because you get the wrong tattoo machine, then your tattoo is going to be crappy in what you do, and you're not going to learn properly, and so on and so forth. And so we started looking for who can get us the best tattoo machine. And you found this guy online.
Yeah.
That was making custom tattoo machines.
Right. He came really high. He came really highly recommended, and he was very well known in the industry. He was a little bit of a rebel.
Yeah, a little bit of a rebel, but he did conventions and things like that. And,
right, and he did solid work.
Yeah, and so we were like, this is the way to go.
Right,
and the guy has tattoo machines to sell.
So we got the money together, and we paid him the money, and we found out how his process worked, and we paid him the money, and it was a lot of money.
Yep, it was a good bit.
And then we never heard from him again.
Literally nothing. And
ever again.
Ever again. And we waited for those machines for probably 2-3 months at least.
Oh, I totally agree with that. It was probably closer to 3 or 4.
And that was our first time realizing that some of the shit they were trying to do, we're not going to get help with. Some of it is, they're working against you. And that's sort of how the tattoo industry was, at least then, where the established guard, the gatekeepers of the tattoo industry, would put up barriers for people trying to start.
Yeah.
And we didn't know that until we started hitting those barriers, that they were actually trying to get you to not do it.
Right.
Now, there could be a couple reasons for that. It could be that it is the natural tattoo artist thing where tattoo artists really don't think the industry is worth anything.
Right.
They don't think they're worth anything.
Right.
They think that anybody that tattoos is really a piece of shit in secret.
Yeah.
And is running some sort of con. And so they're trying to discourage those who want to do it from not ruining their lives by getting involved with industry like tattooing.
Right.
That's one thing. The other thing is they just don't want competition at all.
And that seems more reasonable from a purely business perspective, right?
From a purely business perspective, I agree with you, Mike. But the interesting thing about that is that having met quite a few tattoo artists and dialogued with them for a very long time, I think the two are intrinsically side by side. There are a lot of really positive, optimistic tattoo artists in the top 20, but they're very few and far between.
Right.
In other words, if you name the top 20 tattoo artists right now, right, it might be number 1, number 3, number 9, number 14, and then number 18, 19, 20.
Right.
That are optimistic, positive people who believe they're doing a good thing.
Right.
The other numbers I didn't name absolutely believe they're circus folk. They're pieces of shit,
They
and
hate
they shouldn't
themselves.
be doing it they should not be doing the work.
Well, and that makes sense. Even still, just from a people perspective, we tend to follow the path of least resistance. And in that case, we're a lot like electricity. And the combination of those two things provides the least resistant path to, number one, securing your business and feeding the need to feel like a piece of shit.
Which is a weird need. That's such an odd. That's what I've never understood about tattoo artists. Like, okay, this is something you want to do all the time, right? So yeah, I want to do it all the time. Why the fuck don't you want to be proud of it?
Because 90% of us, I would argue that it is at least that high. 90% of us as people, when we start businesses, we don't think about it, right? I did a video back in May talking about how, do you need a business plan to start a business?
Right. Yeah, I remember that video.
What they don't tell you about doing a business plan is the first step is the executive summary and mission statement.
Right.
Okay? The importance of the mission statement is to start a business with a strong foundation. And if it's tied to you personally, right?
Mm-hmm.
If the business is fulfilling your personal needs,
Right.
okay, and that's its foundation, well, guess what? The stress that business is under is now also stress that you're directly under.
Right. Yeah.
You know? And
Yeah.
so these folk, many people, like 90%, they aren't thinking about it from that perspective. They're just thinking about, I'm starting a business because I want to do this. And they're trying to fulfill their personal needs through that business. And you can't fulfill your personal needs and have a business that really runs separate of yourself if you don't have a plan to begin with, if you don't have an idea of what that mission should be.
Right.
That's a piece of gold there from Mike Payne.
Well, and I think it's what we were missing when we continued the story.
Yeah, exactly. Like we really honestly we're thinking about it in the wrong direction about it being a business. That really what it was more. We're trying to get some headspace, some financial space, some room to grow, and the only way we could see getting that personal goal, those personal goals met, was to start something new and grow into that.
Right.
It was probably the wrong way of going about it. Quite honestly, like we probably should have. Well, I don't think we could have done it a different way. Like I shouldn't say what we should have
yeah.
done.
No, you can't.
Right.
You can't focus on that past. Right. All you can do is go into, and the other mistake that people make is that when they go to fix it, right, they trot out, if they did a business plan, they trot out their old business plan and they try to see where they were correct and where they were incorrect.
Right.
It doesn't matter.
Right.
All you can do is lay a new foundation on a new spot and start building on
Right.
that.
So is this the point in the story where we started tattooing with the machines we had?
Yes. This is the part where. So the conclusion was, we're just gonna get these piece of shit machines that we ever come across, and start practicing on things like not on people's skin, but just getting the feel of it. And the result was, for Ben at least, it felt wrong. Like it didn't feel the way that he thought it would feel. He didn't get the fulfillment out of it.
Yeah.
And we figured it was because it wasn't in skin. But
Yeah, 'cause
but
we
the
were-
thought of putting a machine to a person's skin and ripping a hole in their skin and putting ink in it felt like assault. And so we couldn't do that either.
Well, it felt like that. It felt like that from my perspective, and again, you know, I kind of reference that kind of Indo-Chinese feel, that ancient feel is what I expected. I expected to put a machine in my hand and feel the way the ancients did, and that's probably an incorrect expectation.
Right, it probably was.
But that was what I expected, and so then when I held a machine and used it on a pig's ear or a pig's foot, you know, we were going over to La Mexicana.
La Mexicana.
And picking up a bag of feet.
Yeah, so just some pig skin, guys. That's all we need is some.
And working on that, and it just, because it reacts more closely to human skin than anything else you can practice on, like a banana or a grapefruit or anything like that. And so for me, I can't say for other people.
Right. No, this was strictly just going off of Ben, because Ben is the one who wants to be a tattoo artist. I didn't want to be a tattoo artist, so I wasn't trying to tattoo. We did have another guy that wanted to be a tattoo artist.
Yeah.
And he was going into human skin a bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He tattooed me 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
And they're still on me today, and they'll be on me forever.
Yeah. They'll never be covered up. And what the fuck is that?
Yeah.
But and so we had some experience with the machine and skin, and it just kind of felt a little bit weird for Ben to do it. And so I remember this very specifically. One day, and this was like, this is the legend part of this story, okay? And we'll stop with this. I come into the coffee shop, and Ben has a needle out, and he has an ink bottle out. And he's looking at the needle, and he's looking at the ink bottle. And so he, I don't know if you used a chopstick then or something else, but you strapped the needle to something, and then you looked at your own skin. You dipped the needle into the ink, and you just poked your own skin with the needle and just stared at it.
Right.
And then you did it again.
Right.
And then you did it again.
Yeah.
Until you made a square.
Right.
And I remember looking at your face while you did it.
Yeah.
And every poke was literally as if you were stabbing yourself in the soul. Like you were just like, I can't believe I'm doing this. I'm going to keep doing it. I'm going to keep stabbing myself in the leg.
Yeah. Well, because it was a very surreal moment.
It was. I felt as if somebody was watching me watch you.
Yeah, I don't recommend it. And the main reason I mean, that's not entirely
That's not true.
Within context, I do recommend it. But when we apprentice people here at Black Spot, I do not recommend it.
Right.
And that needs to be stated very clearly, very upfront, because I do not recommend that you go home and tattoo yourself.
Yeah, that is actually a bad idea. And by the way, you're going to hear about this. It didn't work out that well for Ben.
No, and that's what I was trying to describe, that you have, if you're interested in learning, you have a very almost out-of-body experience, because, you know, here you are wanting to learn a thing, but then you're learning the thing on yourself. And so it's almost as if it took me back to another time.
Right.
But like preceding the masters, and I have so much respect for the people that have gone before us and that have laid the foundation, that in everything, in roads, in writing, in books, in societal norms, in vehicles, in food, in construction, in all these areas. I have so much respect, but it was very painful. Like I feel like I'm almost describing, like I feel like fucking Rogan right now describing,
DMT.
DMT. But I wasn't on any drugs, and I wasn't drinking.
He was stone cold sober.
I was
there with
sober, and I just had this experience that, like, it took me to a time when there was no one else to help. And I don't know, I'm going to ask you what your perspective was after that event, but from my perspective,
Yeah.
I don't remember the next 2 days.
Yeah.
Like I remember walking outside, I remember lighting a cigarette, but like all the shapes were different and all the buildings were different and there was no one that could help me. Like I know I talked to you,
Yeah.
but I don't remember what was said. And I probably wasn't talking to you. There were like 4 versions of me walking around and I was talking to them.
This is an interesting phenomenon you describe because a lot of people go through it, right? A lot of people go through it and you don't realize it, right? My personal experience with situations like this, it happens every so often to varying degrees of severity. But most often when I have these moments, okay,
Right.
it's what you would call a moment of pure consciousness. Okay?
Okay.
And the theory behind it is the reason you don't remember anything for the next 2 days is because your brain has spent the next 2 days processing every bit of information it received in that period of time.
Okay.
Right? So your brain can no longer take any more visual or audio input or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's not making memories
It's not
anymore.
making memories. It is solely focused on the fact that in that moment, in those moments of pure consciousness,
Right.
It is now focused solely on understanding every bit of information you collected in that time.
Yeah, I think that you just very succinctly put it into a little bag. What did you experience, Ray, the next 2 days?
So for the next 2 days, I just sort of watched you as you watched yourself. Like I was trying to figure out if what had happened was a good thing or not. You know, it's like because ostensibly this was the first step in a new venture, and I didn't want to make a mistake. And so I was very much into watching your reactions, and all of your reactions were very pointed towards, I think this is the way they did it in the past. What you kept saying over and over is, I think this is the way that the ancients tattooed. I said, well, it's definitely the way that they tattooed. And he was like, well, I don't think it's wrong.
Yeah.
Like you were very pointed about that. That I think that maybe this is the way you should tattoo. I said, well, it's not the way that others tattoo. I kept coming in from that direction.
Yeah.
And trying to basically, how sure are you about this? And you say, I'm not sure, but I can definitely feel in my skin something else happened. Then something went in besides ink, is what you kept saying.
Yeah.
And the more you talked about it, the more I realized I wanted to experience what else went in besides the ink.
Yeah.
And when I came to that conclusion in my head on the second day, I realized that this was a method of tattooing. Like, in other words, this wasn't an experiment. Like, we thought it was an experiment, to get you started, and then we were going to go buy machines.
Right.
It was in that moment that the thought hit me that my next tattoo should be done this way.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to over romanticize it.
No.
I am trying to say though that it was directly my experience.
Yeah,
and I think dealing with me was directly your experience.
Yeah, it was not romantic at all. It was actually kind of fucking terrifying.
Yeah, no, that's what I was going to say. Because when I say I don't remember the next 2 days, like literally, I would pull up to the building. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And it would be like I would spend like 3 minutes thinking about who built it, and the building of Standpipe Coffee House.
Standpipe Coffee House building.
I would literally spend 3 minutes trying to decide if the person who built it felt like I did right then,
Uh-huh.
and if he was alone, if he or she was as alone as I was.
Like literally, Ben would get out of the car, pull up the building. We get out of the car. It was right on the side of the road. We had a smoke spot. He would pull up, hand me a smoke, and we would light up. And I would stand in between him and the road because I didn't want him walking in traffic.
Right.
It was that sort of fear.
Yeah,
Like,
I know. I think that's totally accurate. I wouldn't have been surprised if you put a rope on me.
It was.
Right. Yeah.
like
He has no capability of making sound decision on his own.
It was literally. It's like this guy is in a daze still. Like it was.
What's the next abnormal experience he's going to try?
Exactly. I was like,
that just throws reason out the window.
Is he going to just experiment with food now? Like, what if I ate this rock? Like, I had no idea.
And that's
What if I licked someone's hand?
right.
What does person's fingers taste like?
But the fascinating thing about that is actually the reason I say I don't recommend it in most circumstances. Because unlike my situation, most people do not have someone there to tether them to the real world.
Right.
It is literally a moment of crisis in
Yeah.
all of psychology,
Yes.
right? Like you can sit there and say, look what happened from it, right? But in all of psychology, they will tell you,
Yeah.
right, that you're going to have moments of crisis. And if you aren't strong enough, right, here's the pathologies we see when that crisis hits.
And what most people don't have in those circumstances is another.
A Flavor Ray there.
Yeah, they do.
To
they
watch
don't.
from the outside.
Well, and I think that's what goes back into. Most people don't understand how not instructive, how primary you were in starting the business, because for the first few months there, what you acted like was my anchor.
Right.
And again, not to over romanticize it, but I really don't know what I would have done because I wasn't fucking there.
Right.
I was there in that I was present. I was attempting to see how deep the needle needed to go. I was attempting to see the effect of the different inks we had purchased. I was attempting to recognize the mood of myself and the space I was in. But outside of that, yeah, man, if somebody had walked through and said, hey, the Barnum and Bailey Circus is in Houston, you would have fucking never seen me again.
Yeah, I think my presence was actually the thing that let the experiment continue. And the experiment did continue. And we've gone for the length of the podcast. We haven't gotten to Black Spot yet. But we're going to get to Black Spot on the next one because we're going to continue with this. This is actually pretty important. And I think it's important that we get it recorded. So we're going to continue this for the next episode. Until then, this has been Tattoo with Children. You can find Tattoo with Children on Instagram and Facebook at Tattoo with Children. You can find it on Twitter at Tattooed With because fuck Jack.
Fuck Jack.
You can find me on IG at Madara Shadow. You can find Ben on IG at Black Crow Brother and at Black Spot Tattoo Company. And you can find Mike Payne at CIO Payne and at is it Payne? Is Payne.points?
That's correct.
At Payne.points. And that's the show for now. If you're ever curious about how Black Spot started, this was the beginnings of the beginning. And next episode, we'll get to the beginning of the middle and see how far we go. All right.
Love y'all.
Love you.
Later.
We were born to bring it back, but it's more than basic. It's a portion of his rap, but the core is ancient. It's supported like a pack of some more observations are important, like the fact that we're bored of fake shit. More creative, have the floor, so take it. Travel